All right, well, I think we're a little after 7, so let's go ahead and call the roll.
Maria Ryan,
Here?
Todd Rusk, Brian Sproul, Rachel Valenga, Stephen Wald,
Here.
Ryan Wolber,
Here.
and Bart Bartles.
Here.
Not on my list, but I
Yes,
remember.
there.
Thank you. I would like to take a minute to welcome, we have 2 new members, I think, well, actually, you're both here for the first time this evening. Brian actually joined as of last month and I think had a little under the weather last time and was not able to join us. But I know you have a background in environmental law and you're working in is it the state's attorney's office at this point? Although not specializing in environmental law at the moment, but it's good to have that background at the table. And it is Bart Bartles, is that right? Yeah. And he's working at the University of Illinois, is it ISTC and the Hazardous Waste Research? I know the names of the institutions have changed over time, and I have trouble sometimes keeping up with the name changes.
Right. And then I work with facilities and services as a zero waste coordinator.
Great. And I saw on your LinkedIn that you had a pretty long history of campus sustainability in Michigan. Is that right?
Right. I used to be the campus sustainability manager at Grand Valley State.
Great. Well, welcome to you both. It's great to have you join us. All right. And I think well, we do have a quorum, so I'll turn to the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay. Let's turn to the minutes from our previous meeting. And maybe if we could start with, actually, why don't we start with identifying if there are any changes or corrections that need to be made? Are there any? Okay. If not, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve these minutes.
I can second.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. Great. And then are there any members of the public that would like to address us this evening? All right. All right. Then we'll move along to our communications, and we'll start with the monthly staff report.
Good evening. The first thing on the report is a summary of the work we laid out for the entire calendar year. I made just a few changes based on the way that our work was unfolding, but it's essentially the same. I thought it'd be valuable just to remind everyone. Pretty busy. We have another meeting after next month following this one where we'll talk about climate adaptation, and then we'll start talking about the greenhouse gas inventory and the second phase of the climate action plan. For the current phase of the climate action plan, I'm reporting here we have 42 buildings registered for the UC Energy Star Challenge. That's 44 now. We got a couple new ones since this was posted. Several of the new ones are thanks to Ryan Wolber, who's been encouraging folks he works with through the IGBA to participate. So appreciate that. We have results from our commercial energy efficiency behaviors survey included in the packet. That's a goal that's in the current climate action plan to identify specific barriers through focus groups and surveys in the local business and commercial community regarding reducing emissions from commercial building sector. I've attached the postcard that we sent to all the businesses in Urbana. We partnered with Ameren on this design. Well, they did the design that was their part of the partnership, and we mailed it with them. So that was a nice partnership with Ameren, and what we did was got a couple of good things out of this postcard. One is we promoted Ameren's Act on Energy program, which is really the behavior we're looking for folks to take advantage of those rebates and improve energy efficiency in their commercial buildings. We also promoted the city's energy efficiency incentives in the TIF program, and then we prompted folks to take the survey, which was the goal of this particular element of the climate action plan. Some of the highlights from that survey were there was a pretty low awareness of Energy Star Portfolio Manager. I should say we didn't ask every possible commercial behaviors energy efficiency question you could imagine. That would be too long, and the longer the survey, the less responses you get. So we focused on really two behaviors. One is Energy Star Portfolio Manager specifically, and then benchmarking and tracking your building's energy use more generally, and then also actually getting an energy audit for your facility. So those were the two things we focused on. Not a lot of folks responded that they were familiar with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, so that was interesting. There was also a very low use of other programs to benchmark, track, and reduce commercial building energy use. And there was, however, a significant number of respondents that got an energy audit. That might be, survey response bias. The people who are interested in responding to an energy efficiency survey are also the ones that are interested in getting an audit at their facility. But that's what the results showed. There was also a very low identification of others in the community who are improving energy efficiency in their building. So the question asked something to the effect of, what proportion of people, businesses you're aware of are, improving their energy efficiency. Lots of businesses, a few, none, that kind of thing. And the perception is that not a lot of other businesses are doing this. That's an important question because in terms of three types of appeals, social, emotional, and rational, the social appeal, everyone else is doing it, is generally seen as the most powerful. So if there's a perception that everyone else is getting energy audits and improving the energy efficiency in that building, that's a really powerful motivator for you or I to do it. So that's why we asked that question. I've also attached a summary as well as the full document of a large survey that MTD conducted a few years ago. This survey looked at advantages and barriers to using different modes of transportation, and that pretty well answered one of the questions that we had in the Climate Action Plan, which was to identify barriers to more sustainable transportation choices. The advantages that the MTD study respondents identified for bicycle was low cost, low pollution emissions, flexible, carpool, save money, companionship, convenience, bus, low cost convenience, walk, health, and low cost, and then single occupancy vehicle, which is the least desirable mode in terms of environmental performance. The advantages were flexibility, work usage, and transporting children. The barriers that were identified by respondents to choosing a non-single occupancy vehicle mode were have to use a car during the workday, must use car for work purposes, need car for errands, had to drop children at childcare, and stopped for shopping. If you scroll to the last page, there's a graph. The two highest ranking barriers to choosing alternative modes or more desirable environmental modes were have to use car during workday and must use car for work purposes. Those are the two leading. I have a note in here and a screenshot from our new climate modeling software from ICLEI. Urbana was selected as a pilot community to get early access to this. This program hasn't officially launched yet, so we've been using it for a couple of weeks. It's a modern interface. It's cloud-based, much easier to use than the old system. And so we're evaluating it and sending feedback to ICLEI and slowly getting data sets in and emissions factors and so forth. So we're going to continue to use that and provide feedback. If anyone is particularly interested in looking at that, I'm happy to meet with you anytime and show you. But right now we're still in sort of some data collection and as well as some data input with that program. There's a summary of a Climate Action Plan progress there below. Also wanted to share that Urbana is participating in a pilot test of an energy management software program. This is through ISTC. Essentially, they put some meters, some real-time energy meters on the existing meters here at the city building, and then we get a dashboard where we can see energy use, not instantaneously, but it's reported, I don't know, every hour or something like that. So you get a real fine-grained view of energy use in a building. And it makes it easier to pick out problems with your load or unexpected loads throughout the day and throughout the week and throughout the month. And actually, there's a public face to this dashboard, and the URL is in the packet, so you can check that out yourself.
Isn't that CDAC?
Sorry, CDAC. I should just say Prairie Research Institute, and then I'm never wrong, right? No. Oh, they're not? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm still wrong. The Sustainable Water Management Plan, we are moving forward with an RFP for a one-day rain barrel and compost bin sale. The sales results from prior years are in the packet. We've got bids and we're evaluating them now. We'll choose one soon. That sale will be May 17th, and we're working on providing a little more value added to the event. We've got some folks, I believe it's one of the Prairie advocacy groups in town. They happen to have a plant sale the day before, but they say they always have leftovers. So I told them, well, let's get you set up with a table and you can sell the leftovers along with the rain barrels and compost bins. So we're trying to bring a little more value to that event. Another item in the water plan, facility staff are currently retrofitting faucet aerators in all of our buildings. I got a report this morning, about 2/3 of those are completed. What's left are non-standard sizes. So those are going to take a little while to figure out what size is on there and go seek it out. Generally, everything new and everything that's readily available in a store is very standard. So anything different can be tricky to find. While facility staff were retrofitting those aerators, they also were inventorying all of the flow rates on our toilets. So that'll lead into one of our other water plan goals, which is to retrofit, I think it's 9 toilets over the course of the 7 years of the plan to lower flow models. And there is a graph there showing our climate or our water management plan progress. The next SAC meeting is scheduled Tuesday, April 1st at 7 p.m. in council chambers.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? All right. Thank you. Let's move on to our continuing business, our climate impacts and adaptation pursuant to Goal 4 of the Climate Action Plan. And we have 2 presenters this evening, starting with Steve Wegman, who's a senior engineer with Illinois American Water. Welcome.
American Water Company, being a big national company, one of the advantages that gives us is we have a corporate research and development department and national engineering, and it just so happens that the corporate research people had actually done a webinar out to the States just like the week before Scott called. And so I was able to pull up this a bunch of the slides from their information studies that they've been doing nationwide, which is a good thing because personally I don't know that much about the topic. So I know what we're doing here locally a little bit, but our activities are pretty much, the bulk of what we do is keeping our operation functional as best we can and then making improvements as we go, looking at big picture things we don't have a lot of time and staff to do. But anyhow, in case you didn't know, or we're still under the impression that American Water Company is not a German-owned company. It's an American Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange publicly traded company. 7,000 employees. We're in about 30 states. We're the largest privately owned water supplier in the country. But anyhow, in 2013, this group of people is doing a bunch of research, including assessing climate science and impacts to our water infrastructure, and all those things you can see listed on there. I don't know that I need to read them to you all, but anyhow, it involves engineering, risk management, and service delivery people. And another, I meant to note that one of the advantages to being a corporate group like this, that as opposed to being a municipal-owned water system, which is what most cities this size would have, is having that access. I mean, the only supplier larger than us in Illinois is Chicago, the Chicago City Water Department. So we have access to quite a bit of information and staff. Typically, a city the size of Champaign or Urbana wouldn't have anything like that type of availability. So anyhow, this group, Climate Resiliency, developed a Climate Resiliency Strategic Action Plan. They're working on that. They have 6 technical memos they're putting out, including those ones you see on the list. And the authors and contributors are, that's at our New Jersey Research and Engineering headquarters, focusing on climate resiliency. Anyhow, as you all know, climate is changing. The average global temperature has warmed 1.4 degrees since late 19th century, and the trend is that it's predicted to continue. These projections looking at long-term low emission and high emission of greenhouse gases are calling for significantly higher temperatures. In the low end, looks like we're in the maybe 4, but high end could be up to 8 degrees, and I think that's by the end of the century. And with higher temperatures, you get more frequent heat waves. That's again projected through the end of the century, I think, and that's the low emissions and high emissions estimate of days over 100 degrees, and you can see those are going up everywhere. And Midwest being not the hardest hit, but we don't need more of those. That also brings precipitation changes, and as you can see in this case, we get more rain actually, or more precipitation in the winter and spring. So this wet or this snowy winter might not be a thing. It might be something we have to get used to. I don't know. That's long term. It's not specific year by year. And the other key to water supply is the summer looks drier, and hot, dry times are the things that drive high peak water demands. And there's the other factor that impacts a lot of places is the heavy precipitation trends. If you're getting a reasonable amount of rainwater over normal times, most of it soaks in. As this will be, you're going to see more floods, less water being soaked in, things like that. More intense precipitation events. This is what has happened. Actual changes in numbers of very heavy precipitation events. In the Midwest here, we're up 45% over about 50 years. And then high variability is a big issue. So, and this just three copies of the Palmer Drought Index from 2011, which you can see we were fairly normal, maybe a little bit wet, as West Texas and the lower Great Plains were in terrible drought. Then 2012, and we joined them in the pretty bad drought situation. And then moving to 2013, and the drought moved west, and we got back to green again. So you've got a high degree of variability, which in the water supply business, that means you don't know what you're going to have coming in, and you know that when you've got high droughts, you're going to have to provide more water, which can be an issue too. And just another example of that, looking at the temperature differences between last summer and the summer before, 2012 going to 2013. We were less, we averaged, almost 7 degrees lower and about 5 or 6 inches more rainfall, so just high variability. And it's statistics. It actually is all that's going on here. You increase the temperature and you have an increase of the number of extremes. The bell curve just moves to the right. So that all means different things to water utilities. More frequent droughts means higher peak demands, reduced surface water and groundwater supplies sometimes. It can mean more frequent storms, which can mean power outages, and not here, but along the coast. It's an issue with turbidity. Well, here it could be for if you're surface water supplied, but turbidity, and along the coast it's salinity. And what the water utilities have to do with this is we have to provide increased capacity, we have to provide increased protection and emergency power, and then come up with alternatives. And we just showed a collection of events that American Water was directly impacted by over the last 3 years, and you've probably heard of several of these, and I know a little bit about a few of them, and we'll look at a couple things here later, but one on this page specifically, Cairo, is a very small customer. I think, a very small town. They think they have like 1,000 customers, and their pump station is right at the base of a levee on the Ohio River. That levee is 30 feet high, and water was lapping at the top of the levee, and the system was really at just within a matter of a few days of topping that levee, which would have washed out the whole town. That was 2011, yeah. Anyhow, the system is to upgrade to be able to keep up with the changes so that we can continue to provide drinking water. The North American, I forget what that CWA, Congress of Water Authorities or something like that, has produced this study that says it should cost the country between $300 and almost $700 billion to adapt to that over the 2050 horizon. And the Midwest is not particularly hard hit. In fact, we're about the best off of any of them, but that's a pretty significant impact. So recommendations were, and summary, is that temperatures are going to rise, droughts will increase in frequency and severity, wet areas get wetter, dry areas drier. There would be more high intense rainfall events, and extreme events will increase in frequency and intensity. And looking at the models they studied, they're saying that the modeling is getting better, although it's not really great yet. There's still a lot of question about, especially as you try to get into the specific details. Annually, it's getting better. The local and momentary, it's not that good. So what this means to us as a company is we have to find ways to adapt to it. And many of the standards that we've been building to for years may not be adequate. The typical standard that you see in stormwater activities is the 1 in 100-year flood, and in ours, the drought of record. Well, the 100-year flood, as proved in the Mississippi River flood in 1993, was nowhere near what happened. So that former standard of 100-year flood may not be adequate for the new one. So we have to relook at what our standards that we're designing to are going to be. And since we have to look out 50 years, that's kind of a problem. That's what part of this projection type thing is trying to do, to try to understand what the new changes, what the new standards will need to be able to protect to that. Obviously, these are our 4 main factors that we work to: regulatory, safety, customer satisfaction, and reliability. And the water industry does not have any goals, any clearly established standards at this time for reliability. And I think part of that has been that the water industry has been pretty much almost 100% reliable. They only go down typically in extreme disasters, whereas power company, for example, they go down every time you have a thunderstorm. So they've set some standards on what they think are acceptable, and I think the water industry is recognizing that they need to set some standards to say, well, this business as usual isn't going to be okay. We're going to have to do something to make sure that we stay acceptable. And so there's been this study by the American Water Works Association, the Water Environment Foundation, have been working on trying to come up with some self-assessment benchmarking standards. And really what it comes down to is this is another risk. And when you're designing and working in engineering, you're always working with risk being the likelihood of the failure versus the consequence of the failure. And then we want a resilient system being one that can recover quickly from an extreme event and not go down any further than it has to. So we've done this corporately. They've done this modeling of risk, which I don't know if you're familiar with these risk models, but going across the bottom, you're going from not very likely to extremely likely, and then going across the left side, going up, you can go from either very not very serious to extremely serious, or you can do it in terms of costs, not very expensive to extremely expensive. So obviously you want to get out there and take care of these items in the high likelihood and extremely expensive or extremely critical issue first. So they've done some studying nationwide within our company of what assets we have that are the most critical and the most likely. And Scott also, he sent out a flyer the other day about this. I think they pronounce that CREAT. I'm not sure exactly, but it's anyhow, the EPA has a risk and resiliency model that American Water has been using some of it, and they've rated what they see as the strengths and weaknesses of it here. And that's, I think, being rolled out to some of the local areas to be able to evaluate some of their own items. And this is just a page of the spreadsheet of American Water's most critical, most vulnerable sites. And you can see at the top there is St. Louis County, Missouri, which is our largest, I think it is our largest individual customer, and it's served by Mississippi River Water. And I'm not sure of the locations of the plants, et cetera, but it's fairly vulnerable. So they're going to be focusing a lot of their assets on, American Water will be focusing a lot of their assets on doing things to upgrade and improve these places. And you'll see as you look down here, the Champaign County District would be probably up in this range. I'm not sure exactly what our population served would be, but it's around 135, probably maybe 150,000. And we're not on this map, which is a good thing. So we're not great at risk for vulnerability place. And this is just a set of their criteria of the issues that they had that were the things that they saw as vulnerable, and then the level of importance of the particular issue. And a couple examples of some things where adaptations have already been done. We operate the Alton, Illinois plant, water plant, which was swamped in the 1993 flood. And that was an old plant anyhow that needed to be upgraded. But it was protected from the 100-year flood, supposedly. But I think that area had levee breaches, and the plant went out and the town was out of water. So they rebuilt a new plant up on the bluff, which seems fairly logical. But at the time when that original plant was built 100 years ago, you put your plant right where the water was because it was less pumping to do. And there's some other items that they've mentioned there, places they've done. Another one that I worked on some is at Streeter. I didn't work on this project, but they had a clay pit. They used to make bricks in Streeter several years ago, and the company got the opportunity to buy this old clay pit and using it for a reservoir, because Streeter gets their water supply from the Vermilion River, which, to my knowledge, has never run dry or never run below the amount of water that the city needs. But they have water quality issues. There's major issues with nitrates every summer from coming off of farm fields, and so they can pump water from the river into that reservoir during the higher water quality times, and then use it in place of it or to blend with it in the interims. And we also happen to be the water company that operates Joplin, Missouri, and I like that picture because the water tower is the only thing standing there in the back. But that area was a tornado like that, you're going to have some major disaster things to recover from. I think our water treatment plant was fairly badly hurt, even though the tanks stood. But they were working on some supplemental supply and ways to isolate areas quickly and some things like that they needed to know about. So anyhow, we're looking at developing an overall climate strategy to adapt and mitigate, and then do risk and resiliency assessments. establish level of service goals, and update engineering standards to improve those things. Essentially, those are all, climate change is one of the several items that get put into this flow chart to try to figure out which things we need to work on, where we need to spend our money, what do we have to do to keep our system as operable as possible, you know, how do we look to the future so that we're continuing to be that way. Essentially, it all comes down to risk management. You just figure out the likelihood of failure, the consequences of failure, and come out with that and come up with the things that you need to work on. Short-term action plan, they're going to finalize that strategic action plan. They're going to work on communication strategy, which would be internal and external. You guys are a little ahead of the game on that. On the external, working with risk assessment tools for the local agencies or the local places, setting up targeting levels of service, revising engineering standards, developing high-level risk assessments, and similar strategies for mitigations. And then longer term, they want to update that every couple of years, continue to review the climate science models, and evaluate new tools as they come in, incorporate asset criticality and risk assessments into management practices. And that's really, that's about what I had for this part of it. And I told Scott at the beginning, there's two phases. This is really what was happening corporately in the state of Illinois. Locally here, like I say, I don't work with the corporate people very much. I'd say bringing it back to Champaign, we're pretty safe. Our water comes from the Mahomet Aquifer. The Mahomet Aquifer is, we could talk about sustainability, but I think that might get us into a discussion that go for hours about what does sustainability even mean in the aquifer. Some people, I'm on the East Central region, what is it called? East Central Regional Water Supply Planning Committee, which formed this plan to the year 2050 on water demand and supply. And on that committee, we had many long debates over what it actually meant to be sustainable, because some people would say sustainability means you can keep doing what you are doing forever. Other people would say if what you're doing now is bad, even if you keep doing it forever, you want to stop doing it. So there's some arguments about that both ways. And when you get into the aquifer thing, the aquifer is still full. It's never been emptied, so there's no issue of that. So you can't really say we're emptying the aquifer, although the level of water in the ground has come down since the time that the pumping has been going on. We don't want it to continue to come down, but that level is actually a level above the aquifer, so the aquifer is still full. So what you're having is the pressure head from the aquifer has been decreasing, something about the flow going in and the flow going out, and it's a very complicated system, and the State Water Survey has been studying it for years, and we're working with them to try to know that. Suffice it to say that at the rates we're using it now, the cities have the ability to continue to use as much water as they've been using. The trends are all going towards using less water. I could show you a couple things on that if you have time. This just looking at from a study that we did in this one was this was our comprehensive planning study in 2012. We're looking at customer growth in the area. We see this area is continuing to grow, and amount of water use total tends to depend on the number of customers. So in 2005, when we were planning to build our new treatment plant, we put in these projections, looking at the normal daily demand and peak demands, continuing up to about 25 million gallons a day, and then about around 40 million gallons a day. So we were trying to be able to supply up to almost 50 million gallons a day. But what you can see on that chart, the dots here end, and I drew these lines in because this was done after the study, and this is what's happened the last few years. Since the slight recession in 2007, our population hasn't been growing significantly, and our use rate has continued to decline. And this is our revised new projections of how much we think the demand of water is going to be. Instead of going up to almost, 25 for a normal day, we're going below 20. And in fact, we were below 20 in 2011, I believe it was, that one wet year. Our daily demand was below 20 million gallons a day. We were back up in 2012 over it, and then last year was right at 20 million gallons a day, which if you go back and look, in the year 2000, we were up at almost 22, and that neighborhood. So that has been a result of a significant drop in per capita use of water. And where is it? I think that was the last one I had on that. I better quit there. But anyhow, the way that's going to work is we don't think the demand's going to increase in any time in the future. We've been seeing American Water's been seeing this nationwide, about a 1% per year drop in per capita consumption of water for the last 20 years. And our use rates are still significantly higher than Europe and some other developed world places. So we think that demand could continue to drop at that rate for potentially as much as another 50 years. So unless we have a growth spike, we anticipate probably pumping water at about what we're pumping right now for the next amount of time. So from our definition, that's sustainable. Now, if you listen to Clark Bullard and some of them who were talking about us draining the Sangamon River last summer, I don't know if that happened or not, but there's a lot of issues. There's problems with the fact that anybody who wants to has rights to the aquifer. There's been a big push to do some more irrigation up around Rantoul area where there wasn't any before, because seed corn companies are requiring producers to have irrigation if they want to grow seed corn. Other things like that could be additional demands. I know Bloomington Normal are looking at trying to draw some more water from the aquifer. There's lots of other potential pushes out of it. As it is right now, the uses the way they are, we think it's sustainable. We think we can continue to do it. We are also still working on encouraging conservation. I don't know exactly. I know we've given out some conservation grant type things here and there everywhere, and we've got literature out. We haven't done anything as drastic as what the power company is with these energy grants, and I don't know if something like that might be in the works. That's a state corporate policy level that I don't hear about. But we've been working on developing LEED certified things. Our water treatment plant out on West Bradley Avenue is LEED certified, which was the first one in the state to get that. And we're about to do some more construction work, and we're doing all kinds of we typically are doing all the green energy things we can, trying to be good stewards with as much as we can with that. And I think I'll just quit with that. And if anybody has a lot of stuff I threw out there, if anybody has any questions on it, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Other questions for Mr. Wegman?
So I'm assuming the reduction in demand is just from more water efficient requirements, like on toilets?
I think that's a big part of it. I think all the utilities, all the appliances nowadays, the dishwashers, the toilets, the low flow showers, everything you buy out there is better than it was. And the old stuff, wears out and people replace it with the new and it gets better.
I think the previous slide spoke to this, but I just wanted to clarify the pumping capacity that you have now. There was, when you built the new pumping plant west of town,
yeah, I think
that was built to meet the projected demand as shown in this slide,
yeah.
And then the demand projections changed.
Yeah.
So right now you have basically excess pumping capacity.
We do.
Is that stable, or is that likely to find a use? What's the company's position with regard to having?
The capacities there's actually some of this capacity. I think on that chart, the last 5 MGD would come from an expansion of that Bradley Avenue plant. That number 40, I'm trying to think if that's right. I think that is right now. It's available. We're a regulated utility. If a customer in our district comes and wants water, we're obligated to provide it to them, unless there would. I don't know of any case where we've ever been able to, or anyone has ever made a case of not serving them. The law on withdrawals from the aquifer say that anybody who wants to can use it as long as it's reasonable, which is whatever that means. But, you know, so one reasonable use is there's a chemical company that has a couple of wells out there in the ditch on the Kaskaskia near Bonneville and pumps water from the aquifer into the ditch, and it runs down to Tuscola where it's used, and that's termed reasonable. So, you know, I mean, I don't know what reasonable is, but pretty much anything anybody wants to do is reasonable, I think, is the way it has been interpreted.
Steve?
Yeah.
With changes in precipitation, we've seen a lot of changes in agricultural irrigation, but none of that's tied into your systems, so that would never show up in your use. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I think there's like some garden irrigators and things
Right.
like that people might do, but in general, those are all independent. And if you remember from, I don't think it was last summer, but summer before, there were some people complaining about some new irrigation wells that had run their wells dry. I think it was near Muhammad. I don't remember exactly where that was, but those were cases, and this is another issue in terms of that, the regulation of wells. These large wells are sort of regulated, but the way our wells are drilled, I can even show you. I got a picture of one here. There it is. We go down 300 feet down roughly to the bedrock, and we put a screen in the bottom 80 feet. The aquifer is about 100 feet thick in that area, and above that, it's sealed. There's no intermixing. A lot of these irrigation wells they'd only have screen at the bottom, similar to this, but they'd only have sealing, like bentonite clay, to seal it in the top 20 feet or so. So if you happen to intersect an upper aquifer, like the Glassford aquifer, and you turn on your pump, that upper one's going to be the one that gets emptied first. So that's what happened in those cases. They built a well essentially improperly, and if it had been built right, those people probably wouldn't have run out of water.
Is that improper but still legal?
Still legal,
Hmm.
yeah. I don't think that people would have done it if they'd known that was what was going to happen.
Sure.
So,
Steve, do you anticipate any challenges from climate impacts in terms of delivery? So you've shown that we've got a lot of capacity
Yeah.
for pumping supply.
well, the challenges, I mean, like in terms of the electrical supply, we've already addressed the things. We have generating capacity at each of our plants capable of running the plant if the power is off, that type of thing that the storm's causing. But in terms of like hot weather impacts on the operation of the system, not really. Using groundwater, just for example, we gave a tour out at the Bradley plant here just a couple weeks ago of a university class, and I think it was like 10 degrees that day when we gave it. It was freezing out there, and you know, we run the water up into these clarifier settling basins, and it's open to the air. And of course, they're all asking, well, what happens with that? Well, the water comes out of the ground at about 55 degrees year round. And each one of these tanks is 2 million gallons, and if we run 8 million gallons a day through that plant on a slow day in the winter, that means it's sitting in that 2 million gallon tank for a fourth of a day. You're not going to freeze 2 million gallons or do serious harm to 2 million gallons of water in a central thing in, what would that be, 6 hours. So we're not seeing impacts in the cold weather, and the changes from the cold side, 55 down to 10, I guess it's about the same either way. I've never heard of major impacts. It can change a little bit of the chemistry of how the settling works. You may have to adjust the amount of lime or something like that goes into the thing to settle out the hardness and what have you. But in general, it's not a significant impact. The amount of water gets used is likely to be significant. That's where you get into some issues. And if we get into high flow days with lots of pumping, then the pressure has to go up to pump, and then you get breaks. So that's an issue to deal with.
I have another question about your demand projections and the change projections. And you talked about basically a decadal scale trend of a 1% reduction per year per capita reduction in demand.
20 years.
Okay, so
Yeah.
20 years
Yeah.
of that trend, and that trend might continue for another 50. So I haven't studied this, but I did hear someone else who I would consider, who's in a position to be very informed about this, have another theory that there's been improvements, there's been reductions in things like toilets and washing machines, but that it's approaching, rather than a continuous linear trend, it's likely to have a curve and flatten out because the efficiencies essentially have been realized. There's not a lot of additional efficiencies to be yielded. And I'm just wondering if you're familiar with that theory too, and what went into this projection. I'm just sort of curious.
I'm familiar with the theory of planning beyond 10 years is just blowing smoke or something. When we did this regional water plan, the governor's order was to do it to the year 2050. And I know when I used to do transportation plans and capital improvement plans with the city of Champaign, we wrote a 10-year plan, and we were revising those out 5 years just wildly every year. Yeah. So I, these are good things to look at and think about, but we'll look at this within a few years, and we'll probably go, what were we thinking that day? But I don't know what that's going to mean. So.
I could ask one question if you
Sure.
don't mind. As you were talking earlier, I was kind of thinking about, well, consumption. That's the consumption numbers. That sounds great. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, all's well then, as long as we don't have contamination. And then I'm thinking, oh wait, what happens if we have contamination? So if you don't mind, just giving me your take on how we would be set up if
I just go here. The
heaven
very last,
forbid, contamination occurred.
very last screen, I said, here's what I see as the threats to our use. And I mentioned already the problem of the commons and the increased use of irrigation, and then contaminants is the last one I mentioned. And I see that mostly as cross connections at the recharge points, and we don't even know where all the recharge points are on the aquifer now. We have ideas, and that knowledge has been evolving greatly here in the last 5 years or so. George Roadcap over at the Water Survey has done a lot of good work on that. And I mean, when I first started hearing about the aquifer 15 years ago, people were telling me, oh, that water is all 10,000 years old. It all seeped through the clay to get there. And I used to work for a geotechnical firm, and I used to do soil borings down in that clay. And that clay, that glacial till clay, when you get down 50 feet down in some of those places, is bone dry, hard. Nothing's getting through that. So it just never made sense to me that it was all seeping through there. I always figured there was some connection points. And, well, the city of Decatur found a connection point. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they've got wells out by by Allerton Park, and they turn them on when their lake gets low and then run aquifer water down to Lake Decatur. Well, they were finding out that almost all of the water they were pumping was disappearing out the bottom of the Sangamon River at the same time and not getting to the lake. So they're looking at they've done some different things on that. So there was a recharge point that was found, and there's thought to be another major recharge point up near the Middle Fork and northeast Champaign County area, and there's got to be other areas around that are. Contaminations are an issue. I mentioned landfills. I know that I just brought that up because the Clinton landfill has been a hot thing, but Clinton landfill is downstream of us, essentially. It's the aquifer is essentially flowing east to west. It's not fast, but it does generally move east to west. So while Clinton landfill is a hazard that probably shouldn't be there, it's not particularly a hazard to our drinking water at this time. The old Champaign City landfill, that one worries me because that's only 3 miles from our well field, and we don't know what's in there. Then the other things that fertilizers, I know we deal with fertilizers in all our surface water plants. We're not seeing high levels of fertilizer elements in the Mahomet Aquifer water as of now, and we're not seeing salt as of now. But boy, you look at the amount of salt that went on the roads this winter, and I'm not picking on Bill. Champaign was worse than Urbana, I think. But what are you going to do? I mean, cars have wrecks if you don't salt the roads. But those salt, all that salt is a major concern. I think those are issues that could cause some major contamination problems at some point in the future. As of right now, we're not seeing any of those things in the water. All the things that we're removing from the water are naturally occurring things that came in when the glaciers came through there. So, mhm.
Are there other questions, Todd?
So I appreciate this presentation. This is good. I'm interested in the, I guess the role of conservation and the in the water companies take on that. So even with this trend of decreasing consumption, we have climate change scenarios, and so that will mean something for recharge, even if we don't understand it very well. And then we also have the potential for, we're seeing more and more irrigation. So that's not something that you control, but it's something that affects the aquifer. And then we still have declining levels in the aquifer, even if we're in a nice position right now. So I guess just thinking about long-term risk, and you talked about the corporate long-term outlook. So I guess I just wonder if you have some comments on conservation strategies in a long-term planning horizon.
Well, the company knows that conservation is a must. We have to be, not me personally, but the company wants to be selling water, forever, essentially. And just same way the governments here want to keep maintaining roads forever, or whatever we need, the services that people want, and people are always going to want water. So we're going to want to do that. So we know that populations are tending to increase. I don't know what the population of Champaign County area might be 100 years from now or 200 years from now, but boy, if the trends on those have all been upward, and there's never been a peak. The country, you look at the population, look at a census going back to a couple hundred years or whatever, it's always gone up. If we're going to supply people water, there's going to have to be wise use of water. That conservation's got to happen. And we recognize that. The hard part is that we make money by selling water. So the push is how do you work those two together? And on the one of the parts that makes that hard is we're required by the Commerce Commission to sell water at what's perceived to be a fair rate of water sales. So that's why every individual customer has a per meter charge, and then plus the actual usage charge. And I know a lot of people who their per meter charge is bigger than their usage charge, and they think, well, that hardly seems fair. But well, if you've got a meter and somebody's got to read it, and there's the maintenance and things like that, then your actual cost to the company is slightly higher than, say, a user who used several million gallons. That user has a meter. He only gets read the same way, and if we've got excess capacity, he helps us use our capacity. So those people, I don't know if they've lobbied the commission or how that works, but the commission has decided that we have to give an advantage rate to people who buy in bulk. Well, if there were conservation pricing, that could change. But we can't institute conservation pricing. The Commerce Commission would have to decide to do that, and that's they set our rates for us. So where's it going to go? I don't know. I just know that in the next rate increase that you see from American Water, and I don't know when that'll be, you will probably see part of what the Commerce Commission ruled on was that the fact that we were selling less water to more customers means means we've got to figure out a way to recover the same amount of money to operate, because most of our costs are fixed costs. The actual water is free. We pull it up out of the ground for free. So we've got to have a way of recovering that cost. And I personally, and that's just me talking, I haven't consulted with any company officials here, but I think conservation pricing would be a great idea for helping conservation. I'm not sure how popular it would be in all kinds of places, but it hasn't happened here. I know it happens in a lot of places. I think it's happened out in the desert Southwest and some places like that. But that's just my thoughts on how the thing might go.
Are there, in some of the places where there's more water scarcity, and so around, water's cheap around here, and so I've been around lots of companies, and it's hard to convince them to do conservation because water's cheap.
Right.
And but it's not the case in places where there's more scarcity and where there's conservation pricing or more expensive. Does American Water operate in some of those places, and are there conservation models that can be transferred in some way? I mean, I know it's a different kind of scenario, and you're regulated on what you can do.
Yeah. We operate, I know we have quite a bit of presence in California, and I think we have some in Texas too, and they both have situations like that. I don't know the mechanics of how their pricing works. I know that the California one, we looked at some of that with some of our drought response planning, and boy, they've got some really tight regulations that they can put in when they get in drought situations like they are right now. They tell people, you're shut down on all kinds of things, and it's remarkable for what us Midwesterners are used to, for what they will tell them they can do and can't do. I saw on something online today that Wichita Falls, Texas, has been in a drought portion of the state for a few years now, and they implemented some mandatory restrictions on their water use. And this is a city of 100,000 people, roughly. Before these were instituted, they were using 50 million gallons of water a day, and now they're using 12. Now, on both ends of that, I'm comparing it Champaign-Urbana. How many people are in Champaign-Urbana? Our community of, well, again, if we're serving 150 or 2 or whatever, and we're using 20 million gallons a day, what were they doing with 50 million gallons a day at 100,000? But cutting the 100 down to 12, that's pretty substantial, and they managed to do it. Well, they had to. That's what happens when you're. Oh, I know what it came up because they have a reservoir, and they're now pumping their treated sewage into that reservoir. They're drinking their own waste right now, and hopefully it's clean enough. They're on some kind of a EPA 60-day trial run on this, first one in the nation. So there's lots of options if you get there, if it gets serious enough.
Right.
I assume that's tertiary treated. I don't know. I didn't hear the story on that.
I think one last question
Sure.
probably. So and you alluded to the energy utility programs. Everyone pays a
Right.
little thing into conservation and other kinds of programs. Any outlook on utility for that on the water side of things,
Well,
for some kind of savings incentive
I
programs?
know they've done giveaway programs on these water nozzle aerators and low flow shower heads and things like that. And I think they've run programs before on contributions toward like you can get $50 towards a low flow toilet or something like that. I probably should have called somebody on what's going on right now. I didn't do that, and that's not my department. I don't know what we're doing right now. I know, like I say, I know we talk a lot about it. I don't know what they actually are doing at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Wagner? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, give you a minute to. All right, next we have a presentation by Bill Gray, the Director of Urbana Public Works.
Well, good evening. I know most of you, but I welcome the new members to the commission, and I'm the Public Works Director. My name is Bill Gray, and I thought it'd be important maybe just to start out with just tell you a little bit about what our department's functions are, roles are. We're a department of 80 employees broken up into 6 divisions, and we have an administration division, we have an arbor division, operations division, engineering, fleet, of course, an environmental management, sustainability division, and Within these responsibilities, within these divisions, we have a variety of responsibilities of providing services to the city, and that's involved with, in the Arbor Division, of course, we have the trees, we have maintenance of landscape areas, and we also have a landscape recycling center at our old landfill site. In the operations division, that involves streets and storm and sanitary sewers, street lighting, traffic signals, and drainage, maintenance of alleys, facility maintenance, signs, striping, things of that sort that are throughout the community. We have a engineering staff with professional engineers, engineering technicians, surveyor, and computer mapping technicians. So we do a lot of design in-house, construction engineering, drafting, surveying, etc. The fleet is involved with 150 pieces of equipment that they maintain, and that's from ladder trucks in the fire department to squad cars to dump trucks and backhoes and things of that sort. So there's a variety of equipment that they're involved with. I think you pretty much know what Scott's responsibilities in his division are, but some of the other responsibilities you may not talk about a whole lot are environmental compliance. We have a compliance officer that deals with junk and debris and things, violations of that sort, and then our youth cycle program and our multifamily program, and of course we a lot going on with climate action planning. So that's what this is all about. Then administration is pretty much our administrative assistants and taking care of kind of the back office responsibilities that run a department of 80 employees. So our budget, operating budget, is $10 million a year, and capital improvement planning is it can vary, but generally another $7-8 million a year. So there's a lot of responsibilities within the department. Scott had asked to talk a little bit about climate adaptation or climate change and what impacts there might be to our department. And I was interested to hear what Steve had to say because, quite honestly, although I'm involved locally and statewide and nationally with American Public Works Association, there haven't been a lot of discussion about this within our organization and topics. So this is something that got me thinking in the last couple of weeks about what are the planning, what do we need to be thinking about, particularly if the extremes become more extremes. And I think a couple observations I'll share with you. My thoughts are, first of all, if we're looking at winters and springs that are going to have more precipitation, higher precipitation, we don't need to look any further than what we've experienced this winter, which from a public works performance standpoint has been an extreme challenge for our folks, and in a variety of ways. Just the number of events that we've had, which we haven't seen in quite some time, with snow removal, et cetera, has really been taxing on the crews and the amount of hours they've had to put in. And I don't know if we're up to like 10 weekends this winter that we've had people working and that sort of thing. That's just been really difficult. But one of the unfortunate byproducts has been just the huge toll it's taken on our roads in Urbana, and really this has been a topic throughout the United States. And it's alarming, and I won't sugarcoat it at all. It's very alarming. I'm very concerned about that. And if this is more of the potential what we're seeing in the future with respect to lots of precipitation, lots of freeze-thaw cycles, et cetera, there's going to be that potential price to pay. That's going to be very difficult for public works agencies, Department of Transportation's, at least throughout the snow belt, if you will, to try to cope with the impacts that freeze thawing can do with our road system. One other observation I thought is, if we're talking about extremes with winters being colder and perhaps more precipitation and summers being hotter and drier, that has an impact literally on employee work production. And, when we had a very hot and warm summer last year, we adjust our work hours from 6 to 2, work a straight 8 hours type of thing with breaks on the work site and no travel, no transportation back to the Public Works facility for lunch. So you eat on the job site 20 minutes. That's something we've worked out that's been very functional and efficient for us. But I have to tell you that it's tough to be working in a lot of 90-plus degree temperatures, and dew points are in the 60s and 70s. And so that's an observation that there could be impacts with just productivity, or do we come up with equipment or means to be able to work under these extreme conditions? Steve touched on this, but what I see as being a factor is when we build, whatever it's roads, sewers, street lighting, whatever it might be, there are engineering standards and designs. And they don't change a lot through the years. But if there are going to be more extremes with respect to precipitation, it may force us to take a different look at what are going to be those new standards for the sizes of storm sewers or drainage ways or storage facilities, conveyance structures, et cetera. And, right now, our storm sewer system, generally, the pipes in the ground have what's called a 5-year design. So they are able to take care of more or less a 5-year storm event. Well, that was based on criteria, rainfall data that perhaps was going up through the 70s. A lot more data is there today, but these how many inches of rain fall in an hour or 6 hours or 24 hours, if those numbers are getting higher, then that tells me that our 5-year design, if you will, isn't going to be able to take the more frequent, heavier rain events, and we may see more frequent street flooding, backyard flooding, stream, river flooding, that sort of thing. And then to go back and retrofit that is really tough. So Scott, sell those rain barrels in there May 17th. No, but there needs to be planning in areas like that, or planting more trees. Are there ways to do more bioswales and rain gardens and things of this sort? These are mechanisms to help try to abate, if you will, the runoff from properties. But boy, when those rain events occur, like we had a week or two ago, over 1 inch to 2 inches of rain on solid frozen ground that's 1 to 2 foot thick, you know what? Rain barrels don't work this time of year, or bioswales and that sort of thing. So those are concerns. As to what we may be looking at with respect to stormwater impacts. And unfortunately, as the runoff occurs, that also has a ripple effect into sanitary sewers. There's unfortunately ways that a lot of inflow and infiltration can occur in the sanitary sewers, and if there's more runoff and ability or groundwater penetration to get into those sewers that have cracks or direct connections, and I could talk for a whole night on just sewer I&I issues, but that could exasperate again the sanitary sewer situation and perhaps cause more sewer backups because there's more unwanted water, if you will, or groundwater, rainwater that gets into those sewers. So those are some concerns that come to mind. But the flooding issue is something that we need to look at and study. We have a new stormwater utility fee that was implemented last July. The first bills went out in September. So we're now collecting money to help pay for this utility that has been funded for decades now. One of the first action items for these fees that we're collecting is to do a stormwater master plan in the next 1 to 2 years. And I think a component of that plan could be and should be looking at this very issue, that not only do we want to look at best management practices for containing, controlling runoff and how to abate flooding And how do we look at planning for the fringe areas if and when there is growth within the areas? How do we address maybe localized flooding areas that are within the city? But if the true rain rates, precipitation rates are increasing, maybe there's an aspect that we look at. Is there a different type of design that we would impose on not only our designs but in future development designs, and get more into detention, retention requirements too? So that's something that that we could be looking at. With respect to other aspects of what Public Works' responsibilities are, I think of, will these extreme weather conditions, how will that impact our urban forest? Will there be more mortality rates with certain trees, because of these temperature extremes? Do we need to re-look at the species that we plant? We want a diverse urban forest, but perhaps there's certain species that maybe are in favor now that may not be, because we have to look at different types of trees to plant in our parkways and in our public parks and that sort of thing. So, that's a factor that comes into play that will need some study as time goes on about that. I also think about, will climate change impact material availability? And I have not read a lot about that, but when I say material availability, the materials we use for road building or any of the other infrastructure components, there might be, some shortages perhaps, or higher costs. When I think of climate adaptation, though, the one thing that just strikes me as the biggest threat is just the need for, we're already taxed, is funding. And if this exasperates our ability to maintain what we have, there's just real challenges in the funding that we do in all aspects of public works. And I'm not just speaking about Urbana, I'm talking about throughout the United States. There's just, Steve showed some costs for how do we maintain our water system. Well, you have all the other infrastructure components out there that the American Society of Civil Engineers has a report card, and the score, depending when you read it and how recently, it's a D+ to C-, nationally, and how can we get those grades up higher so that our bridges and roads and sewers are safe and what have you. So this could be a threat. This could be something that really exasperates a situation that we're already struggling with as far as maintaining our infrastructure. One other thing, an important role that Public Works plays is disaster response in general. And we have in Illinois the first statewide Public Works mutual aid network. And this is where agencies sign an agreement to help each other out in the event of a ice storm or an earthquake or a tornado or what have you. In fact, the Illinois Public Works Mutual Aid Network responded to Gifford. And one thing that may not have come out clearly in the media outlets is that the addressing of cleaning up the roads and parkways and getting things cleared and available to help people respond and start the recovery process went remarkably quickly in Washington, Illinois too. And I have to tell you that a lot of that has to be attributed to this IPW-MAN agency that has been in existence for about 5 years now. It's a tremendous way to help others in need, and I say this because if we're talking about more severe climate in the future, again, name your form, whatever it might be, then we need to be able to be in a better position to respond to those in need. And Illinois is a leader. In fact, just to brag on Champaign and Urbana, we were one of the founding members to look at a statewide organization, and we now have 200 agencies from the Cook counties and Rockford areas down to southern Illinois and many in between, and we're continuing to grow this. But it's important that we are in a position to use these resources to respond to the ice storm or the tornado or the flooding situation, whatever it might be. So I wanted to share that with you. You may not be aware of. That helps try to negate the severity of extreme climate. So I think maybe just to kind of recap, I'm thinking that if there's discernible differences in climate that are occurring that we're seeing now and that continues to trend this way, with hotter, drier summers and more rain events in the spring and winter time periods, there's probably going to have to be a revisiting of engineering design standards, and not only for the water production and supply, but I'm talking about particularly sewers and drainage facilities where we have runoff issues, that sort of thing. I don't know short term what that means with respect to road building, other than you need to be sure that you have the inlet capacity in the storm sewers to handle the amount of rain that flows, so you don't have impassable roads occurring every time there's a heavy downpour type of thing. So so those are some of my thoughts, observations. I couldn't tap our national research and development department to give me slides for tonight, but I just thought I thought that was great that Steve was able to provide that. That was very interesting. But I thought I would just share with you some of my thoughts with respect to where I think we may be heading, and leave it at that.
Other questions for Mr. Gray? Steve?
That was a great presentation. Thank you, even without slides. I was wondering if you could focus a little bit on the question of road salt. We heard from Mike Brunk last month that he isn't sure, but suspects road salt is a factor in tree mortality in Champaign-Urbana in part because of its increased use over the last 10, 15 years. And, just basically healthy trees that he can't figure out what else is going on. And I think it's documented that when you have salt on the road and it gets plowed up onto the tree lawns and it percolates down, it can damage tree roots. I was curious, and I think that he mentioned that the city's explored alternatives and more efficient ways of applying salt and pre-salting, using brines and things like that. But if you wanted to talk a little bit about the dynamics of salting and what considerations you have when you're balancing water supply, trees.
Well, I think, first of all, I would say that our practice policy, if you will, is two words: salting sensibly. And what I mean by that is this. We have looked critically and strategically at the types of equipment that are available out there to address the ice and snow events that occur every year. And I have to tell you that if you look at the lane miles that we have and the amount of salt we use compared to almost any agency, we are definitely on the low end of pounds per mile, if you will. And part of that is yes, there are alternatives besides just straight salt. We like to pre-wet the salt with calcium to make it effective and not as much, and it helps to stick to the pavement so that without the pre-wetting, as my car goes down the street, you might kick that salt out to the gutter, and it's not where you really need it to get that brine going and that salting action going. We also have brine tanks, and we're using that with one piece of equipment that is available to us. It's a very expensive piece of equipment, unfortunately, but to have more of that would be even helpful because it's less salt even when you have a brine. There are other chemicals that are out there that are being used by some agencies, including beet juice, mixed with different recipes of water and brine. One of the national foremost leaders in these other products is in McHenry County. Mark DeVries is his name, and he's given a lot of presentations as to other products that are out there. But back to your question and point is that it's not unusual that some agencies may be using 500 to 600 pounds per lane mile of salt. We're 200 pounds per lane mile. And as I look in the paper at what some other agencies are using, and I think of, well, I know their population, I know their road miles, and I look at, boy, they're 2 or more times the amount of salt they use this winter than we have. I got to believe that they must be just applying salt at a very high rate. Not sure why. It's costly, et cetera. So back to the point of what kind of damage is it doing to our parkway, I think it's no secret that salt can do damage to vegetation, to some grasses, what have you. We try to pick plant materials, particularly in our landscaped areas, that are a little more salt tolerant, if you will. I'm not aware of any specific studies or research with respect to what is it that what amount of salt and what zone of the country are you in, to how many applications, how many storms, how many events you have where salt is being applied, and what is that doing to certain trees and certain species. There's a variety of factors, and Mike can speak to it better than I can, but I will tell you from personal experience and what I've read is that droughts in the summer are not helping our trees at all. I mean, if we could, now this would be music to Steve's ear, but if every homeowner would, drip out irrigation out to the trees in the parkway during the, once a week deep root, soaking, that would be great. Now that uses more water. But really, trees get thirsty, and this is having an impact, and sometimes, it shows itself up 1 to 2 to 3 years later. So, particularly younger trees, but boy, and I'm sure Mike has maybe mentioned this. If he hasn't, I'll speak for him. But in your own property or even at parkways, particularly in extended drought, high temperature times of year, water the trees, at least as much as you can in that drip zone area. So, that's a factor too. I think there's other things too. Unfortunately, there might be road construction related work. I looked this year, and Steve, you didn't ask Steve this question, but I can tell you that they've had as many as 5 water main breaks per day with these cold temperatures. The frost, there is ground movement, there's, cast iron water main, not all of it is ductile iron water main, which is a little more bendable, stronger, but the cast iron breaks. And my point to you is that I've seen a lot of excavations right next to trees. And when you're digging down 4 to 5 feet, within feet of the trunk, I know they're taking out hunks of roots that, is bad. So those situations don't help at all. But I think we have good construction standards as far as protecting trees, doing directional boring, for example, where there's conduit, where directional boring can do up to 6-8 inches of pipe now, so we don't trench around trees and that sort of thing. So my point is there's other factors than just salt. So is salt a factor? I would say absolutely it is. And we want to, we're continually looking for other chemicals. Unfortunately, salt is clearly, and by a factor 2 to 3 or more per gallon or per pound or whatever unit you want to use, cheaper than others. So if we want to start stocking up on beet juice and get vats of it in town here and use that, the council might now want to see my budget for snow abatement next year. But there are other products out there, and I think we're in a continual search for, is there a even better environmentally sensitive project than salt? But the thing is salting sensibly, keep the dosage or the application rate as low as you can, but still effective on the highway. At the end of the day, we want motorists, people to be able to use the highway system as quickly as they can and safely. So that's a factor, and it's a risk-reward thing.
Bill, you had mentioned changing design standards for changing expectations. Is that something that Urbana can study and change themselves, or do they have to follow some national standard?
Usually it's a state or national standard for what we do. There is, I think it was the State Water Survey, and I lose track of time, but maybe 20 years ago, did a Bulletin 70, which is an update on precipitation rates in Illinois, and that's kind of a guiding principle we use and modeling for hydrology, hydraulic modeling and such for Boneyard Creek, pipes, et cetera. So for an individual agency to take that on will just be way too costly, and besides, how defensible is it? So you need
Right.
something that's going to be on at least a statewide or national acceptance basis. There are a host of standards in what we use, from IDOT standards to state sewer, storm and sanitary sewer standards, et cetera. So usually we don't develop them. Now we can be part of a committee to look at the changing of those standards, and I have served on similar type committees in the past, and that would be a way to look at it, is on at least a statewide basis. I think this is great that you all are looking at something like this and giving this thought, and it gets staff thinking about it too, and we can expand the discussion among our peers and the associations that we're involved with. My primary national statewide association is the American Public Works Association, and we have meetings all the time, and we throw ideas, and we have conferences, although our May conference is already booked up with ideas, but this would be a great topic that I think I'll throw out for our education committee for next year. And if any of you come across some good speakers or whatever to talk about climate adaptation, or maybe we'll ask one of you to speak, but I think you could have a group of 300 up to 300 individuals at a conference here, and from the state to listen about this, because I think we do need to be thinking about this more.
I do have a question. I wonder, I have two thoughts as you were speaking with regard to both the city council goals that we're going to be commenting on this evening, and then as we look toward our phase 2 of our climate action plan, which we do want to have a adaptation section in there. And what I'm thinking about is what the value might be of doing something like an infrastructure needs assessment for the city, either as a council goal, and then the results of that might feed into an adaptation plan. So my thoughts are not very well formed, but it dawns on me that maybe having something where this is actually part of public works planning in a more formalized way, and that also speaks to some of the financial planning that you were referring to as well, whether you in your position would find that to be something useful or valuable.
Right. No, I think that would be valuable. The master planning, which is kind of a subset or a component, has been lacking for the last many years, and some of the planning documents that we have in some cases go back to 1980, and we really do need to update those planning documents. So that would be helpful. I mean, they've been good documents, and they've served us well, and I think in many respects we get good marks with a lot of delivery systems that we've been able to provide. But quite honestly, we have grown as a city, and we need to think about those areas beyond our borders that the 1980 and before documents were addressing how we should grow and provide infrastructure up to our current boundaries, but we kind of need to look beyond that now. We need to look maybe to Cottonwood Drive or to Curtis Road or up to Olympian Drive or what have you. So it gets fuzzier with respect to how we're going to handle stormwater, and with sanitary sewers, it's pretty good shape because the sanitary district has a plan. I don't know if you all are aware of that, but they've recently updated their master plan. So that might be a speaker topic sometime with Rick Manor to come in and talk about, maybe this very topic with respect to wastewater. Okay. So he's done a recent master plan update. So we need to do one for our storm storm system.
Bill, you had mentioned freeze-thaw cycles might increase, hotter summers. Does this mean that roadways have a shorter lifespan? And do we just have to suffer that and rebuild them, pay to rebuild them more often? Would we take advantage of narrower roadway geometry so that there's less to rebuild more often?
I could spend a long time answering that question, but I'll try to be short. I think to go to your last comments, we are looking at narrower roadways, particularly with new developments. The standards that we had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were just way too wide of a roadway, didn't need that much concrete asphalt. We have examples of, why do we need a 41-foot wide street in a residential area, even if it's a collector street, and there's some examples in town. So we're looking, at that to have narrower streets is one thing. With respect to freeze-thaw cycles, hot temperatures, pavement buckling or whatever in the middle of summer, that type of thing, that does take its toll, but I think the more offending component is literally the financing of our roads. We're having to take a more strategic look at pavement preservation than we ever had, and I know other agencies are too, and what I mean by that is there has to be more intermediary responses to particularly asphalt pavements with respect to slurry seals and crack sealing and chip seals and things of this sort. And these are less costly components to hit that road. Maybe it's at the bottom end of the good scale and kind of in the fair scale to get that pavement back up, to seal it, keep cracks out, keep the moisture out, do more of that. But to put in perspective, since 1990, the city of Urbana has received about $1 million a year in state motor fuel taxes. $1 million every year since 1990. We're in the 25th year. Okay. I don't think I need to tell you that the cost of a cubic yard of concrete or a ton of asphalt has, doubled in that time frame. So right there alone, we're doing half the amount of work. And this is a chronic issue statewide. It's a fixed cents per gallon rate. And sure, population maybe has increased since 1990, but as cars become more efficient, and we want them to be more efficient, and we hope they continue to be more efficient, and as we have electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles who don't pay at the pump, but use the system, that's vehicles that aren't paying their fair share, but taking advantage of the system. There's a issue here with how do you capture those costs. We were literally forced, City Council, to pass a local motor fuel tax. And it's unfortunate, but it's 4 cents more at the local pump. It's providing some more dollars. It's starting to help. But we've been raising the white flag for a while. And again, this isn't Urbana. This is really nationwide. And the federal government has had a problem with, the federal motor fuel tax has been a fixed rate too for 20 years. It hasn't increased. How do you fund, the billions of dollars that are needed on the, interstate highway systems and U.S. highway systems? There's a variety of ideas that are out there, but besides just the flat fee, but it'll be interesting to see. It's a challenge for Congress. It's going to take some real bold initiatives and folks to get together to say, okay, we really need to do this, and this is how we're going to pay for it. So funding has been the biggest offender, more so than the freezing and thawing. And it's really catching up to us. And I don't want you to dwell on Windsor Road because that's an outlier, and I know you've probably all heard about Windsor Road now. That's a real outlier. That's not a normal situation, but it's caused a real problem for us financially, a $6 million problem, of which it's going to be over probably $3 million is going to be our share, and we have federal dollars. And so that's $3 million that I'd rather be spending elsewhere. And typically you're not addressing a concrete road built in 1991 with rebuilding it. We have many concrete streets in town that are 30, 40, 50 years old that have maybe a little patching here or there or crack sealing or what have you, and that's it. And that's one of the advantages of a concrete street, that they usually give you a better life. So that street got cancer, and so that's exasperating our situation too. But it's been flat funding has been the big problem. Did that answer all the components to your
Yeah.
question there? But yeah, narrower roads is good. I will say that besides removal of parking, some of the wider roads have been helpful in establishing a bicycle system, bike lanes in town. So that's a positive component of wider roads in some parts of the community. For those who ride their bikes.
It's a few
Got
here.
one. So we've talked about permeable pavement in here, and I know that the Public Works has looked at that, and I guess so. Just in this context of multifunctionality, addressing stormwater, and I guess there are some claims about freeze thaw or less susceptibility to freeze thaw. So I'm wondering if you could tell us about maybe the status of your investigation. Are there any, pilots or just other investigations into, innovation in, say, road, multifunctionality in roadway construction and design?
I'm not seeing permeable pavements or porous pavements too much on main arterial collector type streets. I'm not seeing that really anywhere. In parking areas, I'm sorry? I think capacity and strength of the pavement, and I think, mainly those two reasons. I'm seeing it in parking areas, and it may be on a street that has parking alongside the street that they may differentiate the classical full-depth asphalt or concrete pavement with maybe a porous type pavement off to the side. I think the biggest concern that public works managers have, though, with roads by and large is the pores of the pavement being filled and blocked, and suddenly you use the functionality of that. I think there's a lot still to be learned with that. Sure, you can use a street sweeper or a vacuum sweeper every so often to perhaps try to keep those areas clear. But it's unclear with the extra cost and investment for those sorts of pavements in parking lots or what have you with respect to long-term. Will they still function the way they originally intended to be designed? But I have we don't have any real examples per se. We looked at a parking lot by Canaan Baptist Church, and we call it Lot 12. So it's East Main Street, and it was like a 20-space parking lot, and we priced out a porous or permeable pavement parking lot versus a traditional parking lot. And budget was a factor and what have you, and it was more than twice the cost to do in that case. A great example of a permeable pavement is the MTD parking lot. If you've been out to the MTD offices, great design. The cross-section of the pavement is about this thick, okay, and they had a grant to build it. And if we were to build that lot ourselves, we couldn't afford to do that. You almost need grant money to do it, but they were able to get the grant money, and that works great, and I think it's functioning fine, and I'd love to have that in our parking lot right out here. So there's that balance of where budgets seem to, unfortunately, trump a lot of times things that you like to do absent grants. We're very aggressive in getting grants in all aspects of public works. We've had a good success story through the years with that, but when it comes to that type of a pavement, particularly in a mainline street, I've not seen those grants per se that exist, and I think I'm still have my hat from Missouri on, and I still have to show me long term, is that going to hold up? Is it going to work? But parking lots, it's working fine. Parking areas, it's working fine. I'm not necessarily so sure that it's been in a place long enough to say that you're not compromising the design life of the pavement or the functionality of the pavement, i.e. that it's like acting like a sponge and absorbing rainwater. But continuing to keep my eyes open and continuing to learn and see what's out there. But there are, one of the positives of that type of pavement is in this snowy time of year, because of the ground warmth that can filter up through the pores of the pavements, that has a better melting action than a normal, traditional, conventional pavement. So that's a nice component to the permeable or porous pavements with ice and snow melt. It's a warmer pavement. I like that part.
Just put sort of underfloor heating along all the roads.
Now that is the solution right there. I wish we were in Iceland or whatever. We can capture that thermal and have all the sidewalks heated. That would, and streets. That would be awesome. Unfortunately, even those systems break down, and maybe after 30, 40 years, you got a leak somewhere, and you got to trace out that broken leak pipe and fix it. But no, that'd be awesome.
Are there any other comments or questions?
But good. I don't know, Todd. Are you familiar with in your research where communities are building regular roadways? I'm not too familiar with that, particularly your busier roadways. I'm not familiar with that.
No, I haven't seen that. I just, we had talked about it in here before, and so I just wanted to hear the latest findings that you had.
We tried to do it, like I said, and when we came up with the cost estimate, it didn't fit the budget.
Right.
So
Right.
I wouldn't mind trying that, and if there's a grant opportunity and we have particularly like a parking lot area, I think that'd be a great way to do it. Our Public Works parking lot needs replacement, so it'd be nice to get a grant for fixing it and put something like that
I'll
in.
keep my eyes open.
I saw yesterday that the State of Illinois Green Infrastructure Grant was canceled. So
Okay.
it's getting tougher and tougher to get grant funds.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I
This is,
thank you for your contributions too, and Scott keeps me apprised of progress being made here, and I'm excited about our climate action plan and what we're doing, and not a lot of communities are far along as we are with what we're doing, and I think we could be a leader and be an example for others to follow. I think you're making a presentation. I'm trying to remember talking about maybe having Scott make a presentation at a conference.
Yeah, there's I can't remember which conference.
Yeah.
Is it APAWA?
Yeah, I think that's APWA. So
About implementing a climate action
plan.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of folks that if you said CAP, they wouldn't know what you're talking about other than a ball cap or something. So.
All right. Well, our next we're looking at the draft council goals, and I don't know if we have any introduction to it.
Sure.
Or
I wanted to create some space on the agenda, and this is included in your packet, just to give you all an opportunity to review the council goals and have any discussion that you're interested in. There's been several meetings, council caucus meetings, where they've been drafting these mayor and council goals. They're usually in sort of a 4-year cycle, although they are updated throughout the 4 years. So this is kind of the beginning of a new cycle. Some of these goals in all the categories are from past versions, and some of them are brand new. Goal 5 is environmental sustainability, and there are some general big picture goals for lots of stuff that we have been discussing here. There are also some goals under environmental sustainability that's more Urbana Farmers Market oriented, but I wanted to just make sure you all had a chance to take a look at these and maybe discuss them.
it's my understanding that although the public can comment on the goals, I know it's on our website, I think there'll be a little bit more of a kind of a media push to let the public know that they're out there in draft form. Please give us your comments as this commission too, you know, and I think in the coming weeks, so they want to wrap those goals up and then have staff trying to start to address those goals.
Would it be, then, I mean, it sounds like perhaps if we would want to submit some comments as a,
Absolutely.
as a commission,
you
we'd
could,
want to do that
individually or
this
as a
evening.
commission, you could, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to start?
No, I think they appreciate the feedback, council members.
Yeah.
They really do. So
I can briefly just mention a few of the goals. There are a couple of goals that touch on different environmental aspects, but they all tie together in terms of a green procurement policy for the city. So the idea is reduce the environmental impact when we're buying things that we're going to buy anyway. We have several evaluation type goals that are in here, including lead policies are those things that we should be standardizing in for our own practices, and also taking a look at what possibilities we have in terms of promoting solar as an energy option for the city, and both city facilities as well as the community as a whole. So a few things that are in there.
I would actually like to, just to kind of touch on what I said earlier, I would suggest maybe adding something with regard to both our sort of green and gray infrastructure needs related to climate change adaptation, to do some sort of needs assessment or master planning that would then feed into CAP Phase 2. I think the only other thing I was thinking about as I was reading through the goals was that there wasn't really explicit mention of completing the implementation of CAP Phase 1 or the Sustainable Water Management Plan. I don't know how important it is. Those are plans that have been formally adopted, so perhaps it's simply redundant to include them here.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, both of those plans have fairly explicit implementation schedules, both of which actually are really longer than this schedule.
Well, if there are no other comments from the floor, perhaps we can. And actually, do we want a formal motion for the one that I put forward, or? I mean, I can't move it because I'm running the meeting, but. Pardon? I don't know if we want to forward that. I'm happy to just throw it out there as an individual comment, but if anybody had wanted that to be, recommendation from the commission, there would need to be a motion from somebody other than myself as the chair.
I move that we include that if we can, or make that suggestion.
And just by way of discussion, I'm not sure it would be accurate, or we wouldn't want it to be misleading that represented the only comment we had or input we would provide to these goals. So if that was forwarded as a recommendation, just to frame it as, now I'm not sure when you're saying there's going to be a public comment period, Bill, or,
it's
if this is
really
like now or never in terms of us communicating or having feedback on these.
That was kind of my impression, is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so there is more time. We don't need to have a final recommendation on these goals at this meeting? Or we
I
good?
checked about a week ago, and I didn't see another caucus meeting scheduled.
Okay.
Now, that you only need, 48 hours to schedule a meeting, so I don't know when the next one will be scheduled.
Okay.
Bill, do you have a sense?
It may be 2 weeks, but I'm not.
Okay. So it could happen before this body meets again.
It could.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, in general, the goals look really good. It's certainly not the case that goals of interest to this commission are only under environmental sustainability. They permeate all the goals. There are things that are relevant to things we've discussed or would have input into. I don't see any big red flags. I haven't really done the second step of thinking about omissions or things we might want to encourage or tweak. But in that sense, I guess I didn't do my homework and read this really carefully before the meeting. I'm reading it now. So I can be sure if I want to comment that I do it within 2 weeks. And I don't know if there's anything else. Anyone else at the table have something they'd want to add to Maria's communication on comprehensive planning? Or how did you phrase it, Maria?
Just to do a needs assessment of our green and gray infrastructure needs.
Yep.
That would then feed into the CAP Phase 2
Okay.
adaptation portion.
Okay.
I will second Rachel's motion.
Is there a discussion? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, that carries. Are there any other thoughts, comments on the council goals? All right. Next, we have announcements. Are there any announcements this evening? All right. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right, we're adjourned.